We anticipate in the next 10 to 12 years, approximately 8 to 6 million Hispanics coming into the United States and 41 million Asians. You have been the majority minority for 400 years in this country. You have been the number 2 population for 400 years. You're going to get kicked out of being number 2. You're going to go down and become number 4. Now, common sense, even a third grade education will tell you, if you didn't get anything when you were number 2, you all jumped ahead of me, but anyway, you can guess what you're going to get when you become number 4.
President Biden, do you support reparations?
Well, I mean, since I haven't spoken on this, got a chance. Number one, the reason we're the country we are is because of immigration. We've been able to cherry pick the best from every single continent. The people who come here have determination, resilience. They are ready to stand up and work like the devil. We have 24 of our 100 children in our school today is Hispanic. The idea that we are going to walk away and not provide every opportunity for them is not only stupid and immoral, but it's bad for America. They are the future of America. Systemic racism that has plagued our nation for far, far too long. I said that over the course of the past year that the blinders have been taken off the nation, the American people. But what many Americans didn't see or had simply refused to see couldn't be ignored any longer. Those 8 minutes and 46 seconds that took George Floyd's life opened the eyes of millions of Americans and millions of people around all over the world. It was the knee on the neck of justice, and it wouldn't be forgotten. And it's not white Americans' fault, but just a fact.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, but many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with. And this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington, in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
We are owed $104 trillion on the very low end, plus $735 billion recurring. This number does not include the cost of about 50 Black Wall Streets that were decimated, nor compound interest from 2017 when Sean D. Rochester's book, The Black Tax, was published, nor the cost of Black life, nor the cost of living increases, nor the war on drugs, nor the current day pandemic. The number I'm working with is for slavery, Jim Crow, and accrued ongoing systemic racism, oppression, and disadvantage in the country our ancestors built with their lives. Good afternoon on the West Coast. Good afternoon in the mountain. Good afternoon in the central. Good afternoon on the East Coast. You know exactly who it is, family. Angela Nirvana, your hostess with the mostest on the reparationist perspective, bringing you those ADOCS hot topics and making the case for reparations, making the case for weaponizing our vote and socializing our suffering. And today, family, this is your midday wake-up call. Yes, family, as the world of ADOCS turns, keeping the pedal to the metal on the reparations discussion, keeping it forefront,
and center of everything I do. Yes, because without it, we are finished. Without it, we get to eat the cost of slavery. That is what institutional systemic racism has in store for ADOCS as a lineage. Our extinction. This is ethnic cleansing. Slavery has never stopped. We are still the property of the government. And this is problematic because we deserve to be free. We deserve to be amongst the wealthy. We should not be on the bottom as the anchor of this country's capitalism. Because capitalism requires a bottom caste. And this government has decided long ago when they dragged us here in chains that we are the bottom caste. And now you see everybody getting in on the act. It's ADOCS against the world. It's ADOCS against the world. This government is weaponizing immigration against us to make us bottom caste, fourth-class citizens in the country our ancestors built with their lives. And I am here using my voice Monday through Thursday at 12 and 6 Pacific Standard Time to ring the alarm. We are at George Floyd, 9 minutes, 29 seconds to the neck by design of institutional systemic racism. You've seen it for yourselves. Biden managed to weaponize what happened to George Floyd to give Asians protections and $80.5 million for AAPI for their COVID relief, okay, for their domestic violence, and for their anti-Asian racist sentiment. Nothing for ADOCS thus far. The electorate, 87%, not me, showed up and voted them into office, and he promised to have our back. Where you at, Biden? So I'm over here calling out the puckery, and I'm going to just keep this up while I talk about it. This little graph here shows you how we are on the bottom. The immigrants who migrated here on the backs of our ancestors' heinous chattel slave labor, on the backs of our civil rights movement. They are getting the bag. They are okay while we are being ethnically cleansed out of here by the race civilians and the race soldiers alike. So I want to pick up where I left off yesterday with the article discussing how Biden is to address jobs, pay gaps, housing, and lending for Black Americans and Latinas. Latinas. Always talking about Black and brown. When it comes to Asians, I don't hear anything about ADOCS being mentioned when it comes to the Asians, when it comes to the Hispanics, when it comes to the Indians. I never hear ADOCS mentioned. But whenever the discussion is us, they've always got to make it a people of color party or a minority party. That's to make sure they give everything that's owed to us to all the other groups while excluding us and making us eat this cost of slavery, making us eat the L. So I want to pick up with this article. We left off at the pay gap. Blacks paid less than whites. As usual, I'm going to read and then share how I see it in between. Now, in 2016, the net worth of a typical white family was $171,000, almost 10 times that of an African-American family, which typically had a net worth of $17,409, according to Brookings. Now, me speaking, these numbers are more egregious since the pandemic. So in 2016, we may have had a net worth of $17,409. It's about half that now. And white folks had $171,000. It's about $200,000 now, two and a quarter. Okay? So just understand that these numbers are dated. We don't have the new data, but it's abysmal. Just know that it is abysmal. And we're on the losing end of this. And nobody is talking about any other way to close the egregious racial wealth gap since they want to study a cashless reparations under HR 40. Nobody's talking about what to do about this. All they're continuing to do is, for example, when you hold corporations to hiring someone black, they're hiring the black immigrants, not the American descendant of chattel slavery. That's how they do it. This is why we're fighting down here in California for our own ethnicity, and we're winning. Thanks to your help out there. When I charge the alarm, you guys send the emails, you make the phone calls. We need all hands on deck. We're at George Floyd, 9 minutes, 29 seconds to the net. So we're working on being identified as Black American descendants of chattel slavery. You see, when you're dealing with the trickery and the puckery of white inferiors, you've got to stay 100 years ahead of them when we're already 500 behind them. Because we are in a circle of fire. We're in a pressure cooker right now, family. And folks are skipping to the loo because of the Biden administration, who is complicit in tethering us to the bottom as the bottom caste in the country our ancestors built with their lives. The Democrats and the Republicans alike have placed us in a pressure cooker where we are forced to weaponize the only commodity we've got, our vote. I'll share with you how before I close the show. Back to the text. While wealth involves assets that go beyond weekly wages, yes, it does. Income is not wealth. Income plays a significant part. And Black Americans on average are paid less than their white peers, no matter their profession or education. Me speaking. White folks are making other groups white to stay in power and to control the bag. They successfully made Irish white, Italian white. Now they're making Hispanics white and Asians white. So let's talk about the median national income for Asians is higher than even for white folks. The median national income for Asians is $87,000. And their net wealth position down here in Southern California is $465,000. To white folks around $150,000, to ADOCS 200 liquid. Their liquidity, okay? White folks' median national income is $65,000. To ADOCS median national income $41,000, and that feels very inflated since COVID. Even though they claim that those are more recent numbers, I don't really rightfully believe that. But no matter how you slice it, we're paid significantly less than white folks and the immigrant groups that white folks make white. Recent census data reported that the median income for white non-Hispanic households was $76,057 in 2019, a 5.7% increase over the previous year, and an 8.2% increase since 2000. So that's why I'm saying my numbers are wrong. The median income, well, I don't know if my numbers are wrong. That is from 2020. We will double check these numbers, but they're talking 2019 here. The median income for Black households saw a steeper spike, 8.5% in 1 year. Yeah, but let's talk about where we started from. But it hovered at $46,073 in 2019 and had crept up just 1.4% from where median income was in 2000. Okay. Quote, there are barriers. Okay, 46,000. So in 2020, though, I saw where the median national income for us, now it was 46,000 in 2019. It dropped to 41,000 in 2020. So this report is wrong. Quote, there are barriers in the labor market that further contribute to the gender and racial wealth gap, says Keisha Kazi, who added that African American workers also experience higher rates of joblessness at every level of education. So, me speaking, I have said to you guys repeatedly that education doesn't close the over $100 trillion egregious racial wealth gap. Education doesn't do this, nor do gig jobs. You can work as many gig jobs as you want. You will never build wealth. Nor if you were to stop buying Jordans or hair weaves or nails, would that close an over $100 trillion egregious racial wealth gap? It just will not happen. We share less than 700 billion since COVID. That's not even a trillion. And the difference is shared by the top 10% of blacks, which are mostly black immigrants. It only takes $150,000 a year to be in the top 10% of the 2.54 trillion that we as black folks share. Okay? In this country. And the bulk of those salaries go to black immigrants because what did I tell you at the top of the show? Corporations fill the black quota with black immigrants. So they don't have to look at your face and do anything about you when they start to get feelings of white guilt. They're not hiring us. And the new form of discrimination, they don't want us to demand quotas down here. Ward Connerly undid our affirmative action quotas with Prop 209. Our very own did this back in 96 down here. They undid it by calling it reverse discrimination when there were quotas in place to guarantee we get a seat at the educational and the job tables. So now that that's done because he convinced very easily the immigrants and the white folks down here that it's a form of reverse discrimination to afford his own people a seat at the table. Now the Hispanics have found a backdoor way to keep us out altogether, and it is a language requirement. You must be bilingual just to get the interview. And when you show up speaking as fluent as Pedro, you still don't have the complexion for the protection because you can't identify like them as white. You can't afford to identify as white because there are two ways to be white in this country. You can pay for whiteness as a black person or a person of color, or you can be made white by the government. And that's not even about the immigrants. That's about whiteness staying in power. When they allow other groups to identify as white, it bolsters their numbers in the census to get them more of the benefits. In the same way that when we all identify as black or African American, masks the failure of this government to the very descendants of the ancestors who built all the wealth both groups eat from with their lives, you see. And mask it. So you're thinking you're balling because, your black share 2.54 trillion. Number one, you're not comparing it to the fact that white folks share over 100 trillion since COVID. So you think you're doing something with 2.54 trillion. And that's why, white folks are like, what's going on? Why are they executing all the black folks? Because we're not worth 2.54 trillion. When you put immigration, black immigrants, and what they earned and what their wealth position is on top of American descendants of chattel slavery, you are able to successfully mask the fact that we share less than 700 billion since COVID. You see how that works? $2.54 trillion is not even, what is that? A sixth of who we are as the 13%, a seventh of who we are, 1/7 of who we are in terms of the percentage that we hold in this country. And we don't have buying power. We've got debt. Back to the text. There are barriers in the labor market that further contribute to the gender and racial wealth gap. Oh, I did that part. Let me jump down. Black men, on average, make 71 cents for every dollar paid to white men, according to the Economic Policy Institute. Black women, meanwhile, earn 63 cents for every dollar paid to white non-Hispanic men. That adds up to a loss of $24,127 a year for Black women, or $965,078 over the course of a work life spanning 40 years. Close to $1 million we're losing by being underpaid, according to an analysis by the American Association of University Women. And when you factor in the fact that Black men and Black women have the highest numbers of unemployment and underemployment, it's far more egregious than close to $1 million that we're losing over the course of our work life. Lower wages, longer gaps in employment, and jobs that are less likely to offer pensions or savings plans like 401k plans also impact how much income people have to carry them through retirement. I just got off a call with my financial advisor. I am now as an independent contractor because that is what many of these jobs have become for us. We've got to create our own systems to stay gainfully employed. Speaking of which, my advocacy in educating the masses is one of them. Please like, share, subscribe, donate, turn on your notifications, because I am looking to make a full-time living sounding the alarm nationally and internationally about the plight of the American descendants of chattel slavery. Welcome one and all to the live. Brian Johnson, I see you chatting away as my co-host. Thank you so much. I love you, Black and Strong. What's up, Trey X? I see you, family. Yeah, so I am now getting myself in a position to become my own economy because I, too, am working with all of my education and all of my diverse background at a third of my income since the pandemic. I've got to do something. Each of us have to do something. So when you're an independent contractor or you're in business for yourself, you're only self-employed. It's not like you can afford to hire employees. So you're not making a whole gang of money. You're not making a whole gang of money. So how do you set aside money for healthcare, bills, life insurance, and retirement, and college for your kids on a median national income of $41,000? You've got to reinvent yourself and find ways to make multiple six figures out of $0 So in a minute, you're going to start to see me make my videos a subscription site at my website. It has to be that way. I'm pouring hours into the research to put these shows together, and then I'm spending hours with my local grassroots to get the reparations for the state and for the Fed. Like, it's a lot of work. It's a full-time job. So I will be, you're going to see a transition. I'm going to become my own Patreon. I don't need Facebook or ScrewTube taking a percentage of nothing. I've got to do something to make sure I can stay an active voice in this movement, and that's my solution. So each and every one of us has to come up with a way to survive, not just survive, but to thrive until they cut the reparations checks in the trillions over multi-generations. So back to the text. Uh-oh, sorry guys, I jumped. Okay, back to the text. So yeah, you're not going to have it because these corporations aren't hiring you, number one. And even if you are hired, these corporations are not paying for pensions, paying into 401ks, matching nothing. That is done. And this is the problem I have with both sides of the aisle, bringing in all this immigration on top of our already existing plight as American descendants of chattel slavery in this country. Back to the text. I'll be back over, Brian, to read your comments, love. African-American seniors are less likely to have financial assets, retirement accounts, and home equity than white seniors. Yeah. But get this, the boomers are the only ones that benefited from affirmative action. They just got comfortable, took their foot off the gas, didn't put a secure gate up. So they got pensions, they got houses, they've got retirement, they've got a little bit of something to leave their kids. But that's where it begins and ends. Gen X on down, we're treading water, family. Remedies to root out systemic biases. Let me go back. African American Economic Security and the Role of Social Security, that was co-written by Kiji Kazi. Let me give you guys this book. African American seniors are less likely to have financial assets, retirement accounts, and home equity than white seniors, says a July 2019 paper, African American Economic Security and the Role of Social Security, that was co-written by Kiji Kazi. I'm sharing that with you guys. Give me a second. We don't have a choice but to do for self. We don't have a choice. They're not hiring us. That's what they've left us with. Pulling ourselves up by our bootless straps. We did it before, so we can do it again, but damn, is it exhausting. This is what our ancestors had to do. It was taken away from them. Their 40 acres and a mule. And they managed to build Black Wall Streets, about 60 of them all throughout the country, that was burned down and people were killed because of white rage, white inferior rage. They said, oh, no. You can't pull yourself up by your bootless straps and thrive. That's not how this is going to work. So we're going to kill you and we're going to burn down everything you build. Remedies to root out systemic biases, back to the text. Despite entrenched beliefs in race, there are ways to root out systemic biases, experts say. Quote, we created these concepts to suppress. We can create new concepts to create inclusion. No, we can pay that reparations in the trillions over multi-generations. There's no other way. And they're not offering any other way. They're offering more programs they can give with the left and take away with the right. With $151 million per ADOCS, you can pay for your own kids' education. You don't need they free stuff that ain't so free. You can buy your own house. You can start your own business. You can put away for your own retirement. You don't need them. And that's why they know they've got the money, but not the will to do the reparations. That's coming to a series soon. It's called Pocket Watching. Why the Democrats had the money and not the will to pay reparations. One of 10 shows God is birthing through me. We created these, okay, Black Americans are over-policed. We are discriminated against in the job market. These things you can correct, and it will help change the perception of people of color. Once again, I hate that term. That's a way to mask what the government on every level is doing to extinct ADOCS. You're not interested in real police reform if you are talking about taking away, ending qualified immunity from the George Floyd Act, which Kuhn Clyburn said, take that away, we'll take the rest, which would never have saved George Floyd's life. The only shot he would have had is to have qualified immunity ended and several race soldiers put under the jail in order to encourage and inspire the domestic terrorists that they hire with a badge and place into our communities to stop, lest a life sentence would come for them, lest executions will come for them, right? So the real meat and potatoes of that George Floyd Act, they're talking about taking it out. And Democrats are like Coon Clyburn are on board for that. None of this stops until you stop hiring domestic terrorists and putting them in our communities, and until you end qualified immunity, until you decimate private prisons, which many of the government on the Democratic and the Republican side are invested in. They got shares of stock over there because that's slavery. Slavery never ended. It just morphed into these other things like sharecropping and convict leasing and debtor's prison and the private prison industrial complex. The enslavement goes on. Not jobs, not education. Preschool to prison pipeline. Remedies to bridge the wealth gap can include measures like federal job guarantees. For us exclusively, if you're doing it under the people of color moniker, you're not serious about the social justice and economic justice for ADOCS. Social and economic justice for ADOCS. You know, Biden, like how you gave Asians protection and AAPI $80.5 million. Federal job guarantees specifically for ADOCS. Everybody else ain't having a problem getting work. But you know that. You know it. In which any adult who wants a job can get one from the government. Higher taxes on wealth versus income. And the introduction of trusts known as baby bonds, economists, civil rights advocates, and lawmakers say. Listen, yes, they say it. Because they want class-based policies which don't fix race. Here they go with conflating the two. You start off with talking about Black Americans, then you transition into including Latinas. Now you're talking any adult. Now, any adult is not having challenges finding work. Any adult is not finding challenges with underemployment. Any adult is not set up for the preschool to prison pipeline. Any adult doesn't have a problem buying homes. Any adult doesn't have a problem owning business. There's only one adult. And they descend from American Choctaw slavery. Welcome to your midday wake-up call. This is the problem. Such initiatives will also have an impact on lower income families regardless of race. Do you see? This article is labeled Biden to address jobs, pay gaps, housing, lending for Black Americans. They never stick to the title. They never stick to American descendants of chattel slavery. Inevitably, they're always in here trying to weaponize what should be exclusively for us, who's on the bottom, because class-based policies don't fix race, to give to us with the left and take away with the right, to make it about all lives mattering, when the only life in this country that has failed to matter in 500 plus years since we've been here is Black life. I don't need folks marching just for us to stop being executed by the race soldiers. If you're not fighting for if you're not marching and protesting for our economic justice, you don't give a damn about Black life, because dollars bring dignity and being poor makes us a target. So miss me with the fake outrage. Back to the text. Conceived by the economist Derek Hamilton, baby bonds would be federally funded accounts set up for every child born in the U.S. with larger contributions given over time to those in poor families. What's different about this than Kuhn-Clyburn's 10-20-30 plan? 30% going mostly to Appalachian white that Bernie Sanders and Biden actually like. The same Kuhn-Clyburn that said, it's okay, let's pass the empty George Floyd Act without ending qualified immunity. We'll take it. While we can't even get an anti-lynch bill signed into law, it's been 100 years. In July 2019, Senator Cory Booker, Democrat in New Jersey, and Representative Ayanna Pressley, Democrat in Massachusetts, reintroduced the American Opportunity Accounts Act, which would start every newborn, with $1,000. Each child would receive up to $2,000 more each year based on their family's earnings. And at age 18, he or she could tap that money to buy a home or pay for higher education. You see how they've got the reparations and not the will? They got it for class-based policies. They are literally taking our reparations and fixing everyone. If you fix everyone who's already doing significantly better than ADOCS, where are we? If you lift everyone, where are we? Still on the bottom. As the anchor of this country's capitalism, the Biden administration also has some promising initiatives, says Hatch of Color of Change. They include improved access to credit. Why do we need more credit? We need cash. That can help narrow the racial wealth gap. Credit. So extend us out on more debt. And that's going to narrow the racial wealth gap. We get to borrow our way into closing the egregious racial wealth gap. At what? 30%? And making sure that half of the new funds allocated by a federal paycheck protection program go to businesses with no more than 50 employees. That could be especially helpful to Black-owned businesses, the majority of which are solo ventures or employ no more than 2 people. Our priority will be Black, Latina, Asian, and Native American-owned small businesses. Who owns the least? Who owns the least number of small businesses? But they want, once again, class-based initiatives with our reparations, while telling you we need to study and it's going to be cashless. Why is it going to be cashless? They're giving it all away. Biden said when announcing his economic and jobs team on January 8th, quote, we're going to make a concerted effort to help small businesses in low-income communities in big cities, small towns, rural communities that have faced systemic barriers to relief. Who has faced the most egregious systemic barrier to relief but the American descendant of chattel slavery? Nothing for us. What are we, day 120? I don't see any of this language in the Latina, Asian, and Native American policies. None. I don't see us mentioned. In the same way they always come up in discussions for us. You bought this nonsense in here. You create the problem before making ADOCS whole. And now you want me to give a damn that the debt is in the trillions over multi-generations. And you want our vote to be the solution. making immigrants a priority to neutralize our vote the same way you've neutralized us economically. I'm imploring for us to move as a bloc. A trifecta of either party has gotten us to George Floyd 9 minutes and 29 seconds to the neck. I'm imploring upon you to give a red top of the ticket and a blue Congress to protect the over 53% of ADOCS since COVID who rely on government assistance by design of institutional systemic racism. I couldn't even wait to the end of the show to tell you how to weaponize your vote. That's my square until times get better, until they cut the checks in the trillions over multi-generations. Mix it up. Shut the government down by weaponizing your vote. The way they weaponize immigration and whiteness against ADOCS. LGBTQIA against ADOCS. Still, more far-reaching measures like federal business grants and a higher minimum wage are also necessary, Hatch says. Higher minimum wage with a median national home price of $340,000. What's $15 an hour going to do in 2021? By the time you give that, hello, 8 Democrats that voted against it federally, the people will require $50 an hour just to buy a house. All of it should be grants. There should be no lending. There should be no extension of credit to close an over $100 trillion egregious racial wealth gap. It should be cash and grants for ADOCS. Quote, what we need from the Biden-Harris administration is a federal jobs guarantee, an influx of affordable housing, a higher federal minimum wage, and much more, Hatch says. If Black communities are going to survive this crisis, we need the new administration to act with the urgency this moment requires. While you speak about giving all those things to everybody, that's our reparations being used to fix all of whatever the hell they created. You got to lean in and just say no. Biden has said he is hopeful it will be easier to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour now that the Democrats control Congress in the wake of Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff winning the recent Georgia runoff elections for 2 seats in the Senate. It didn't happen, family. 8 Democrats voted against it. This is why I keep telling y'all they're 2 wings of the same oligarch bird. With such initiatives, race could perhaps become less of a barrier and more of a marker to measure progress and change. Quote, you can't create a whole society based on race and then just stop, says Dina Hayes Green, co-founder of the Racial Equality Institute. We have to take account of race until we change the structure that perpetuates these differences over and over again. Then we can stop checking the boxes. So that concludes that article. I now want to finish out, hold on one second. I want, before I jump to closing the racial wealth gap, which requires heavy progressive taxation, I want to read this article, Why We Need Reparations for Black Americans. Give me a second, family. April 15th last year. Let's see what this has to say. And if there's time left, I'll jump to the other one. I'm going to try to get to your comments, though, in about 15 minutes because I don't like going too far. I don't like going over it all. I try to do this show in an hour. But, you know, I was born to talk. Hold on, family. Just give me a second. Welcome to the live. Like, share, subscribe, turn on your notifications. Thank you for your contributions. one and all. Okay. Let's see how long this article is. It's pretty lengthy. Let me go back. Let me get it started. Executive summary. Let's see here. Oh, this is a 6-pager. Lord, the full brief is a 6-pager. I'm going to finish up the other one, and we'll do this one after we complete the other one. We'll spend a couple days on this. 6 pages. I might be able to get through a page a day. That's huge. And there's another one I need to finish for you guys too. The name of it won't come to me right now, but I will build that show out to finish that, and then we'll get into this other one that I just found. Okay, so now we're on policy recommendations. Racial justice requires heavy taxes on wealth. This is, I hope to be able to complete, well, we'll do our best. We'll get through as much as we can for the next 10 minutes, and I'll jump over and read your comments for the last 15. Let me take a sip. Most analysis, of course, I'll be commenting. Most analysis of the racial wealth gap and most policy agendas to close the disparity focus on the median household, and for good reason. The median captures the experience of the typical person, for whom housing and education costs are major factors in wealth accumulation. But as the data above demonstrate, closing the median racial disparity in wealth is not the whole task. Garrity and Mullen used the total racial wealth gap as their measure of the contemporary economic disparity between Black and white Americans that has resulted from centuries of discrimination and exploitation. Taking into account the distribution of the total racial wealth gap, it is clear that racial justice requires progressive taxation. A first step would be to reverse the slide toward regressivity that has characterized the American tax code in recent decades. Top marginal income tax rates have fallen from a peak of 92% in the early 1950s to 37% today. The income tax rewards wealth over work by taxing income from ownership at much lower rates than income from salaries and wages. State and local taxes, moreover, are generally regressive. In some, the tax code is only somewhat progressive for those between the poor and upper middle class, and tax rates actually go down for the very rich. Additionally, though nominally colorblind, the U.S. tax code is not race neutral in its effects. As political scientist Chris Pharisee notes, tax expenditures disproportionately help upper middle class whites. Tax advantages for home ownership amount to a racial subsidy for white families, while local property tax assessments are systematically biased against Black homeowners. Legal scholar Dorothy Brown notes that Black families are more likely to pay a marriage penalty. In addition, there are tax privileged workplace retirement plans, which fewer Black people have access to because of our unemployment and underemployment, and tax benefits for the elderly, which fewer Black people receive due to shorter life expectancy. Low-income people of color are also targeted for audits, and states have come to increasingly rely on fees and fines, which are extremely regressive and linked to discriminatory policing. In other words, tax policies compound the discrimination and exploitation that Black people experience in hiring, housing, education, health, and other aspects of life. Reversing these policies and top-heavy tax cuts, like the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, would help ensure that the tax code does not exacerbate racial inequity. But to close the total racial wealth gap requires more than just the undoing of the tax code's most regressive and racially biased aspects. It demands taxation at levels high enough to reduce the extreme wealth hoarding that characterizes the contemporary American economy. It demands reparations in the trillions over multi-generations. Me speaking. Tax policies that would substantially reduce the total racial wealth gap must be highly progressive and very heavy. The first point is obvious. Progressive taxes hit those at the top of the economic spectrum, where the bulk of the racial wealth gap resides. The second point, that progressive taxes need to be high to be meaningful, is also an obvious truth, though more rarely acknowledged. Progressivity measures only the relative impact of a tax, not its total effect. For example, a tax of $1 on billionaires and $0 on everyone else is highly progressive, but it is far too low to affect the distribution of wealth. There are an array of tax policies that can fit these basic criteria. Taxes on estates or inheritance are especially promising because intragenerational transfers account for fully half of total wealth in the United States, as well as more of the racial wealth gap than any other demographic and socioeconomic indicators, including education, income, and household structure. Higher top marginal tax rates on income, while not exactly correlated with wealth, reduce income inequality, both pre and post-tax. Both of these approaches are tried and true. As economists Emmanuel Saez and Gabriel Zuckman explain, quote, the development of progressive income and estate taxation in the mid-20th century made it difficult to accumulate and pass on large fortunes. When these policies were reversed in the late 20th century, the economic elite found they could amass and transfer to their heirs a larger and larger share of wealth. Perhaps the most efficient route is the newly popular proposal of a tax directly on wealth. Legal scholar Beverly Moran has discussed the potential of a wealth tax in the context of a reparations program. Using data from Saez and Zuckman on the distributional effects of the wealth tax plans, we can estimate the potential impact of such a policy on the racial wealth gap. This is good. While they sit up here and study an HR 40 cashless reparations. The most aggressive plan considered by Saez and Zuckman, proposed by Thomas Piketty in his 2019 book, Capital and Ideology, would impose a 90% marginal tax rate on billionaires, which would, in essence, limit fortunes to $1 billion. Though Piketty's proposed tax would touch barely 600 households, it would immediately reduce racial wealth inequality by $294 billion. That's no real money when you talk about an egregious racial wealth gap of over $100 trillion. But I guess it's a down payment. It would be a start. Applying a similar policy at a lower threshold, 110 million in wealth, would reach about 16,000 households and would reduce racial wealth inequality by about a remarkable 500 billion. If we go by Darity and Mullen's number, there's at least a $12 trillion is needed for 13% of ADOCS to close the over $100 trillion egregious racial wealth gap. It needs on the bottom end 12 trillion for the 13%. And you're talking about 500 billion, not even 1 trillion. It's not even a 12th of what Darity says is required. I don't like that he calls it reparations. That should not be labeled that. Reparations, a mayor's consortium says we're owed 6.2 quadrillion, which is 151 million per ADOCS. And there's no time to cry about it because you allowed it to go on for over, how many years since we were emancipated. Note that this impact comes prior to any allocation of the revenue raised by these taxes, which would amount to trillions of dollars. Just like I've been saying, these revenues could also be allocated to reduce the racial wealth gap. But the tax alone results in an increase in racial equity of several $100 billion simply by reducing the fortunes of the extremely wealthy who are disproportionately white. You think? If such a narrowly targeted tax can have a measurable impact on the racial wealth gap, a more comprehensive tax strategy to reduce wealth concentration could easily have even more substantial effects. Assessing the impact on the total racial wealth gap should become a standard practice in the analysis of tax proposals' distributional effects. While technically complicated, depending on the measure and given the lack of race-specific data gathered by the IRS, such calculations provide vital information about the economic implications of tax proposals. What is already clear, however, is that heavy progressive taxation can and should reverse racial inequity at the economic levels left unaddressed by expenditure-based racial justice policies. So we're going to pick up on the conclusion of this article tomorrow, and then I get to start the other article, Why We Need Reparations for Black Americans. Let me come over and read your comments. Welcome to the live, one and all. Please like, share, subscribe, turn on your notifications. Let's see what my family has to say about it. Okay, so Brian says, a lot of this is Brian. He's a great co-host. Prior to his being elected, when Biden was asked about reparations, specifically for ADOCS, his response was he was okay with it once Native Americans get theirs first. Disrespectful. Not only did he say that, he said on the debate stage, he went on a long tirade, which you can hear at the top of the show. He went on a long tirade about how immigrants built this country, Hispanics in particular, and how we're not going to forget what they've done. They've been a tremendous asset to this country. So to hell with the fact that they made us the slaves and they built all the wealth that immigrants and white folks alike eat from with our ancestors' lives through the worst heinous chattel slave labor known to the free world. That be damned. When asked a question about reparations on the debate stage, Biden pivoted to the Hispanics' contribution to this country when not one of them suffered the heinous chattel slave labor that our ancestors were forced to endure, forced to be raped on the breeding farms that got us from 700,000 once they decided it was no longer lucrative to import us. They were no longer turning as big a profit by importing us as African slaves. They created breeding farms to rape us and to mate us with men who were not our husbands. We grew from 700,000 slaves to 4 million slaves upon being emancipated, which we had to fight for in the same way we've got to fight for civil rights and economic inclusion. Know this, family, we'll be fighting for the rest of our lives to not only procure the reparations, but to secure the reparations, lest it becomes what affirmative action has become, a benefit for white women, immigrants, and LGBTQIA, while we are being ethnically cleansed of out this country that our ancestors built with their lives. We will have to fight till our last breath, and we'll have to train our children so they can train their children, and so on and so forth. Okay? And Native Americans got reparations. In 1866, they got the casinos. For him to pivot and talk about what the Native Americans need, of which he just gave them 30.2 billion more. You're going to pivot when asked a question about reparations and how you're for it, but Native Americans first. Anybody but ADOCS. And when it comes to ADOCS, you're talking about a cashless reparations study under HR 40. Brian says, due for selferism will also not close the racial wealth gap. This chasm was created by a system which historically kept a group back, hence giving another group an accrued advantage. Another white wealth transfer. No, doing for yourself will not close the egregious racial wealth gap, but if they're not hiring us, we must find another way, family. We must find another way. I am weaponizing my voice in the reparationist movement and trying to build a stream of income to be the voice. Since Patrice Cullors and Tamika Mallory want us continue off the ledge, they're continuing to push voting for the Democrats, a trifecta of the Democrats. I'm not for that at all. It is why we are on the bottom, and if we continue, we will be ethnically cleansed up out of here and fourth-class citizens or worse. If we don't weaponize the only commodity we've got left, our vote. So you must come up with a way to supplement whatever your gifts are so you can supplement whatever income you've got coming in. And get yourself in a position to not need a job, because they are not hiring you, even if you speak Spanish as fluent as Pedro. Welcome to the live. This is your midday wake-up call. Brian says, this becomes evident with the ability of white high school graduates to receive more income than their black counterparts with higher education. Not only that, Brian, white high school dropouts are more gainfully employed than American descendant of chattel slavery college degree. Let that sink in. On economic inclusion, Brian says, this is why integration in the 50s, 60s was a farce. The only reason white America was not for it at that time was because it couldn't come as free slave labor. Exactly. These white inferiors weaponized black labor force to neutralize the white inferiors economically. In the same way, they are weaponizing immigration against ADOCS to neutralize us economically and force us to eat the cost of slavery. Cynthia Adiyami, welcome to the live, my love. Brian says, oh, Lord have mercy, I jumped. On extending credit, isn't that what contributed to the stock market crash of 1929? Cynthia says, right, we need credit forgiveness. Absolutely, not more credit at 30% to close the $100 trillion plus egregious racial wealth gap. Biden's brilliant idea is to give them more credit, allow them to qualify for more credit. So it's supposed to cost us to close the egregious racial wealth gap. We're supposed to pay for that. Tax loopholes is another way the wealthy are able to circumvent many of the financial impositions on the lower classes. Factoring in who's typically at either spectrum makes for a double whammy. All of this stuff is a white wealth transfer. Because money is power. Which is why we've been rendered powerless. But you still got maybe one election cycle to make an impact by weaponizing your vote. One left. There's 70 million immigrants in this country. To our ADOCS, 37 million. 41 if you count in everybody else. Biden has designs to bring in 22 million more. That'll be 92 million to ADOCS 37 million. They won't need our vote. Especially after they give our reparations away to everybody else under class-based policies. LD Ward, welcome to the live, my love. A teacher in full effect. Many of native blacks of the USA should be sounding off as freedmen. That explains who we are from getting debunked back into the institution of slavery by so many names. Darling LD Ward, you said a mouthful. That's the fight. We're looking to reestablish the Freedmen's Bureau. Stay tuned to the Reparations Perspective channel. I'm not at liberty to say specifics because what you have found, LD Ward, is that the immigrants have taken specific language from the Freedmen's Bureau to build it into legislation and policies for their bag, for their come up. It's a nightmare right now. Immigrants, Brian says, were only able to become assets to this country because America already had a booming economy and opportunity bolstered by the country's foundational slave labor. Absolutely. Herb say, not Pedro. Juan, Pedro. I don't know. Brian says, they don't come just to help. They come to get something in return. That's called a business transaction. Okay, I'm done. Thank you, Brian. Don't cry. We got to keep the spotlight on all the puckery. That's what I do at the Reparations Perspective. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, turn on your notifications. I hope to see you back here at 6 p.m. for your anti-Black racism report. It's going to be rich. Until then, you make it a beautiful, God-inspired rest of your afternoon. I love you, Black. I love you, strong. Peace.